As you consider your new role working with students with disabilities, think about any ethical issues or dilemmas that might arise when working with this population of students. While your job will primarily involve supporting the student in the general education classroom, it's not always going to be the traditional classroom. For many students, especially those who have goals in communication and social-emotional learning, you will be preparing them in other non-classroom settings like in the hallways, bus, a job site, lunchroom, elective classes, school functions like assemblies and community activities that are all part of the general education classroom experience. For these opportunities, here are a few skills you can incorporate into your professional practice to make sure you're providing students with autonomy, dignity, and the highest ethical regard. The first skill is confidentiality. It's not your place to share sensitive information about a student. If a fellow student asks about one of the students you support, the student is welcome to share what they're comfortable with. Kids are naturally curious, but they also need to learn that sometimes questions like that are deeply personal to the student. It's safe to say, it's not my place to answer that question for you, but you're welcome to ask, student name, outside of class if you feel comfortable. Additionally, you'll be interacting with many parents and community members in this position. It is easy to build relationships with them as they come to pick up their child or volunteer in the classroom. Adults are also curious, and again, you have a responsibility to the students you're working with. No matter your relationship with the other adult, the information about the student is still confidential. Don't worry about offending people if you say, "I can't share that information." If they know you're doing that for one student, they'll be thankful that you would do it if it were their child too. This also applies to community job sites if appropriate in your setting. You need to determine with your supervising teacher what the need-to-know information is for the employer prior to beginning the process of a job interview and training. It's also important to get the student and parent or guardian consent before sharing the discussed need-to-know information. Consider having a job site confidentiality form, much like a field trip form, that is signed at the beginning of a job site by parents or guardians and students. The second skill is maintaining respect for student decisions. We know that providing choices to students is a way to build autonomy and assertiveness in students. However, those skills will not develop if we don't respect our students' choices. Imagine an interaction between a student and adult going something like this. Do you want a breadstick or an apple with your lunch? A breadstick. Wouldn't you rather have an apple? It's much healthier. I'd like a breadstick. Are you sure? I guess I could have an apple instead. That's a great choice. While the intentions in this conversation were good because the adult wanted the student to make a healthy choice, instead, the adult reinforced the student for giving into what the adult was asking of them. Seems kind of backwards, doesn't it? Some students you work with might have verbal communication barriers and require assistive technology to get their social, academic, and biological needs met. If you're working with a student, it's very important to keep a few things in mind. First, students who are nonverbal or have limited communication are still present in the conversation. Further, it's not uncommon for someone who is nonverbal to have strong auditory skills. This means that although they may not be able to physically communicate with you through words, they're still likely to hear everything you're saying. For these reasons, there are a few expectations regarding dignity and respect. First, never talk about a student as if they're not there. If you need to have a conversation about a student, maintain their dignity and include them in the conversation when appropriate. Additionally, if a student uses assistive technology to communicate, make sure you receive adequate training so you are able to work with the student to use it. The speech-language pathologist will work with you to train and make sure you and your students are able to use it correctly. It is every student's right to be able to communicate, regardless if it involves speaking or not. It's also important to always respect their communication method and provide them access to it, whether it's a communication book, an iPad, a picture exchange system, etc. Their communication method should be accessible and available at all times. This means we should always be sure they have it with them and that it's accessible for participation in all class settings, school-wide activities, field trips, and others. It goes with them everywhere. The communication method is that person's voice. Consequently, it's important to emphasize that it is never acceptable to remove a student's communication device for any reason. Removing a communication device would be as unethical as taping a child's mouth closed. If a student uses a mobility aid, whether a wheelchair, cane, walker, service dog, or another assistive device, please view this tool as an extension of their body. If appropriate, Always ask for consent before touching or assisting with these tools. Just as you would never take a communication device away from a student, you should never take a mobility aid away from them as well. It's also important to teach other students this information. Again, children are naturally curious and may be tempted to touch a mobility device, but it is our responsibility to teach them that this is not allowed. Instead, try to help them understand and emphasize that these tools are an extension of their body and they depend on them to get around. In addition, please do not use the term wheelchair-bound or able-bodied. These terms are not appropriate, as they make it seem like the tool a person is using is hindering them from accessing all environments, which is the opposite of this purpose. Instead, use phrases like wheelchair user or he uses a cane to navigate the building. Some students you work with may also need extensive help in the bathroom, such as diaper changes or assistance using the toilet and washing hands. If you have a student who requires diaper changes, always make sure there's another trained person in the bathroom with you. Additionally, always include the student in everything you're doing by talking to them throughout the process. Refrain from making comments about their bodies or your personal feelings towards completing some of the less than glamorous tasks. If a student requires assistance using the toilet, ask them if they'd like you to provide a drape for their lap and look away if possible. Some students you work with may display out of the ordinary behavior. Some of your students may have behaviors that are more significant and have a written behavior intervention plan that your supervising teacher will review with you. In this case, you will have a prescribed set of steps to follow if a student engages in a specific behavior. In other cases, you may have students who engage in peculiar behaviors, where you will need to correct them in front of other adults or students across all environments in school. It's important when correcting behavior in the general education setting, you're not embarrassing the student in front of their peers. Create a safe space to redirect the student, and if necessary, find a private space to reflect on a behavior that occurred. Sometimes, what may seem strange to us is completely normal to someone else. We need to keep this perspective in mind when working with students with disabilities. This is especially true for students who may engage in repetitive movements, such as rocking, hand flapping, pacing, etc. Work with your classroom teacher to create a plan for students to appropriately engage in these self-regulating behaviors without causing disruption to the class. While it would take hours to cover all ethical considerations when working with students, it's important to keep these at the forefront. Overall, students with disabilities deserve equitable access and dignity just like anyone else would expect. If you have questions or an ethical concern, you must bring this to your supervising teacher.